Turmoil in Turkey. Reuters is reporting that moments ago that Turkish President Erdogan says that the country will not lose an economic war. But Turkey's lira is tumbling to a record low against the U.S. dollar over the threat of U.S. financial sanctions. Turkey's turbulent economy now sparking fears of a global economic shakeup. Joining us right now to talk more about that and the U.S. economy, Jon Hilsenrath, the Wall Street Journal's global economics editor. Jon, good to see you this morning.
Hey, Maria, great to be here.
What are your thoughts in terms of this getting bigger and bigger and impacting other emerging markets and perhaps the U.S. as well? What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, this is what always happens when we see a currency going into a tailspin in a place like Turkey. The first question you ask is, who else is at risk? You know, what kind of contagion might we see from this? You know, you have to look at countries like South Africa, Argentina, Brazil have wobbled a little bit. And then the really interesting one is Russia. Its currency is off. You know, in the cases of Russia and Turkey, we're talking about the U.S., instead of being the country that kind of manages and stabilizes things, is prodding these countries with sanctions in the case of Turkey and Russia.
Yeah, John, one of the interesting aspects of this is that President Erdogan took over his central bank, and he wasn't pleased with the job they were doing. So now he's in charge of the economy, and that's what really started leading to the decline of the lira. And then we're starting to see that their yields now on their 10-year treasury are above 20%. What's the end game here? How does this end? Where do we, all of a sudden we're talking about contagion, but I don't see it as contagion, right? Given that it seems to be isolated here. So where do we go from here?
Well, you know, so in the case of Turkey, it has all of the classic telltale signs of a mismanaged economy. Its banking system is very unstable. It's very exposed to foreign lending. There's a lot of external debt. It's got large current account trade deficits that it has trouble financing. You know, in cases like this in the past, we've seen the IMF come in and stabilize an economy, but you have to wonder if there's a role for the IMF here. You have to wonder if there's a role for the U.S. in stabilizing Turkey. You know, the U.S. is actually on the other side of this. We've sanctioned Turkey over its detention of an American pastor, Brunson. And we've also imposed tariffs on their steel exports. So, you know, as far as the end game, it's hard to say what that end game is when the IMF isn't really, you know, might not be a player here.
Yeah. And Erdogan, John, doesn't have the power that Vladimir Putin does. Very often and I'm not making any predictions, but when Russia is in dire financial straits, you will see Putin become overtly hostile, invade another country to try and drive the price of oil up. And Erdogan can brag about, we're not going to lose an economic war, but Turkey does not have the financial heft on the global stage in terms of the size of the economy or our trading power as the United States.
Can I just be cynical for a minute? I mean, in the sense that we're all apoplectic here about the currencies being adversely affected, but what is the point of sanctions if it is not to have an impact? And if the U.S. wants to have a policy which is saying to Putin, you are in trouble for the way you have behaved, misusing chemical agents, right, on people. If they want to say to Turkey, there is a cost for what you have done, then you want, in a sense, their economies to feel it, because that's the only way you get the changes that you are desiring. So it seems a little bit odd that we are having flurries over this. The whole point is for it to have an adverse effect on these economies,
but I think it's the
that are specific to these economies.
Impact on the global economy. Well, this is what we're talking about.
The economy that are going to feel it are the European ones that have the Turkish debt, that are, you know, they did well last year, but now that looks anomalous. They've got heavy-handed, large governments to support, and they have these aging populations, so they don't have the growth. So this exposure for them is much more dire than it is for us.
So the question becomes, is this going to be systemic? And is it going to impact the U.S. and other economies across the world, Jon?
Well, so 2 points. One is, you know, I would say that's what your view isn't at all a cynical view. I think it's exactly what the Trump administration's view is in terms of how it deals with international affairs. You know, the Trump administration has a policy of using American economic muscle to have its way in situations like this. So I think that's certainly the case. Will it impact the U.S.? you know, we're seeing the dollar strengthen. So, you know, when the Turkish lira falls, when the Russian ruble falls, when people get worried about global contagions, they move into U.S. dollar assets, and that does have impacts on the economy. It makes our exports more expensive. It makes imports less expensive. So it actually, ironically, widens trade deficits, which the president has said is a sign of American weakness. A stronger dollar makes that makes those trade deficits